Hai no hai lam sobo joto no ke nong bagi tu phavika forest law ba laws related to forest ni final video part অনেকটা কুইশন দङ যত পারে তাড়াতাড়ি পাইনা চেষ্টা খানে के তিনি নি পুলা কুইশন নাই ফরেস্ট কনজারভেশন एक्ट 1918 नि ऊपर ठीक है सो ले करी चेंगाई नै तिनी फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन नदी the forest conservation act was enacted in which year okay 1980 ठीक है second question the main objectives of forest conservation act 1980 is तमने option B that is conservation of forest land ठीक है next question under the forest conservation act prior approval of which authority is mandatory for diversion of forest land so मोkai central government ठीक है next question which section of the forest conservation act contains the core provision regarding the forest land diversion so forest land no non forest use nu gediba chang onek somoy bolong rong no tane agricultural land ba nok tang lai manu right so ati reserve forest ba ati declared forest land rong no jodi non forest land no convert khane angke sabani anumoti na prior approval na central government ठीक है so both section of omoni byapari sejak tongse ठीक है so in section 2 ठीक है of forest conservation act 1980 wo total 5 ton section ठीक है और question 5 how many sections are there in the forest conservation act 1980 ठीक है so total 5 ta section dong out of that 5 section section number 2 common byapari sejak the core provision regarding forest land diversion which of the following activities is considered a non-forest purpose under the Forest Conservation Act? Option reject होगा wildlife conservation, afforestation, soil conservation, mine. Of course, motor mining. ठीक है. The Forest Conservation Act 1980 restricts de-reservation of forest. So, Forest Conservation Act mainly Forest Conservation Act, Indian Forest Act 1927 double ना. साबन परे मो फाइगा तमा फरेस्ट कंजर्वेशन एक्ट तो के मेनली मो फोकस कयो जे चिनि जे फरेस्ट लैंड अब नॉन फरेस्ट लैंड कन्वर्ट टांग तो अब नो एम खै सनम अमन नाइदे डी रिजर्वेशन ऑफ फरेस्ट ठीक है जे ऑलरेडी रिजर्व फरेस्ट तो माने बा डिक्लेयर्ड फरेस्ट तो माने अब नॉन फरेस्ट यूज कन्वर्ट टांग सो द मे एक्ट रेस्ट्रिक्ट अम डी रिजर्वेशन ऑफ फरेस्ट which committee is constituted under Forest Conservation Act to advise the central government okay advisory committee ठीक है the concept of contemporary compensatory of afforestation is associated with term of okay Forest Conservation Act 1980 ठीक है which land marked Supreme Court case expanded the meaning of the term forest in India. So, case answer है TN Goda Burman case. More very important. Next question is the Forest Conservation Act 1980 comes under the subject list under which subject list of the Indian Constitution? Okay, concurrent list. Okay. So, in Indian Constitution, हमने तो तीनटा लिस्ट होगा तो यूनियन लिस्ट स्टेट लिस्ट कॉन्करेंट लिस्ट ये बताओ क्या कैसे रेसिडुअरी लिस्ट बताओ ठीक है सो कॉन्करेंट लिस्ट तो क्या है और अब क्या है तब स्टेट गवर्नमेंट ने अंडर वो कलायो सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने अंडर वो कलायो सो स्टेट गवर्नमेंट रूल्स नमन अब नहीं ऊपर हो आ सब्जेक्ट नहीं ऊपर है रम दी फॉरेस्ट फाइनेंस ठीक है सो स्टेट गवर्नमेंट अब रूल्स नमन सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट अब रूल्स नमन हाउएवर वैसे कुछ नुकलायो state government ni rule by central government ni rule of onek jaga conflict so ati conflict but dispute situation of always central government is a rule abono no maman ठीक है so residuary list to norok simon na agi jokhon constitution sanam jaka atame koyekta jinis adi subject constitution no include khajalia for example tabone information technology IT by internet doga time kuch kringe abo sabo control khaina afro abeno list to dajaglia साकाने तीनटा लिस्ट ठीक है सो आटे हाई सब्जेक्ट रखना तब रेसिडुअरी लिस्ट तो डाक जब इंफॉर्मेशन टेक्नोलॉजी हमारा क्या साइबर सिक्योरिटी रा ठीक है इंटरनेट रा अब सो रेसिडुअल लिस्ट जो दाजा का एंड मो सबसे मैंने सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने कंट्रोल हो तमने मोने आंसर के कॉन्करेंट लिस्ट अब तक ऐसे एक्ट वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट वाइल्ड लाइफ प्रोटेक्शन एक्ट 1972 नाइदी बुफरो खजा का 1972 स्क्रीनशॉट ना दिनरो स्क्रीनशॉट ना रिंगो The main objective of the wildlife protection of 1972 is protection of wildlife and biodiversity option. How many schedules are there in Wildlife Protection Act 1972? 6 schedules. 6 schedules. Which schedule of the Wildlife Protection Act provides absolute protection to endangered species? Okay, schedule 1. Which section of the Wildlife Protection Act prohibits hunting of wild animals? Okay, section 9. Which authority is chaired by the Prime Minister of India under the Wildlife Protection Act? Okay, National Board of Wildlife. ठीक है मो National Board of Wildlife ni chairman सब अब Prime Minister and मो जे board ताम ने अंडर समझा का Wildlife Protection Act 1972 ने अंडर मो board समझा का constitute कर which protected area can be declared under the Wildlife Protection Act 1970. So, Wildlife Protection Act 1972 ni under no chung tam no connecta forest rong no ba gorong no chung tam declare kai national park, wildlife sanctuaries, conservation reserves, mana biosphere reserves log ni declare kai mano bo act ni under mo ni under. So, among answer all of the above. Okay, national park, wildlife sanctuary, biosphere reserves, samara. Which schedules of Wildlife Protection Act deals with the plants that require cultivation license? Okay, Schedule 6. Next question: under the Wildlife Protection Act, which animal category is considered burning and may be hunted under specific condition? Okay, schedule animals under Schedule 5, but Schedule 5 animals. So, no, net organize Schedule 1 bobo animal class, but Schedule 5 bobo animal class. ठीक है वो नहीं दी बोरनो का हंटिंग करने में परमिशन दी जागी माना अंडर स्पेसिफिक कंडीशन ठीक है 10 नंबर का द वाइल्ड लाइफ प्रोटेक्शन एक्ट 1972 वाज पास्ड बाय द पार्लियामेंट ऑफ इंडिया ऑफ कोर्स मोटा नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन एनवायरनमेंट प्रोटेक्शन एक्ट 1986 न्यू द एनवायरनमेंट प्रोटेक्शन एक्ट वाज इनेक्टेड इन व्हिच ईयर मका 1986 The Environment Protection Act 1986 was enacted mainly after which disaster? After Bhopal gas tragedy. Okay? The Environment Protection Act 1986 was enacted under which article of the Indian Constitution? Okay, Article 253. Which authority has the power to take measure under the Environment Protection Act 1986? Okay, Central Government. The Environment Protection Act 1986 is often called umbrella legislation. Which section of the EPA by Environment Protection Act empowers the central government to make rules regarding environmental pollution? Okay, Section 6. The Environment Protection Act extends to whole of India. Next question: which of the following is the major objective of the Environment Protection Act 1986? Okay, protection of protection and improvement of animal. Next question: the maximum imprisonment for violation of Environment Protection Act 1986 may extend up to how many years? 5 years. Okay. Which conference inspired the enactment of the Environment Protection Act 1986? Okay, Stockholm Conference 1972. Next question guys: scheduled tribes and other traditional forest dwellers act bamono insert a recognition of Forest Right Act 2026 by Forest Right Act 2006 sorry not 26 2006 so Forest Right Act 2026 no insert. So money first question very important: the scheduled tribe and other traditional forest dwellers recognition of Forest Right Act is commonly known as okay, Forest Right Act 2006. 2006. The Forest Right Act was enacted in which year? Okay, 2006. The main objective of the Forest Right Act 2006 is recognize the right of forest dwelling communities under the Forest Right Act, which authority initiate the process of determining forest rights? Okay, Gram Sabha, very important. The Forest Right Act seeks to correct the historical injustice to the forest dwellers. So time crane bagi option samia fatwat paringa nango. Under the Forest Right Act, individual land rights may be recognized up to 4 hectares. Other traditional forest dweller must have resided in the forest for at least 75 years. Which of the following right is recognized under the Forest Right Act 2026? Right to minor forest produce, community forest resource right, grazing rights, all of them. All of them. Okay? The Forest Right Act came into force in 2008. Okay? 2006 or enactment mane lagu 2008. So 2008 answer. Which ministry is the nodal ministry for implementing the Forest Right Act 2006? So jehetu oro tribal rock involved, right? Tribal rock involved nebagi mo Ministry of Tribal Affairs, not Ministry of Environment and Forest. It will be Ministry of Tribal Affairs, as this act involves the tribal communities. National Forest Policy 1988. National Forest Policy was revised in 1988. Again 1952 National Forest Policy more revised in 1988. The primary objective of the National Forest Policy 1988 is environmental stability and ecological balance. According to the National Forest Policy 1988, what percentage of India's geographical area should be under the forest or tree cover? So, 33%. So, National Forest Policy ne under sija tongo je chini whole of India or 33% at least forest on. In hilly and mountainous region, the National Forest Policy recommends forest cover of how many percent? 60%. So, je jaga hilly area jemon chini Tripura, but Himalayan state, Arunachal, Assam, Northeast, Tripura, Uttarakhand, Himachal, Himalayan state, more the hilly area yadiba or okay. Our National Forest Policy terms at least 60% forest, 66% forest on. Okay. Which program emerged as a major outcome of the National Forest Policy 1988? Okay, Joint Forest Management. The National Forest Policy 1988 emphasizes participation of local communities and tribal people. Which of the following is encouraged under National Forest Policy 1988? Okay, afforestation and social forestry. The National Forest Policy 1988 gives special emphasis meeting the needs of rural and tribal population. Which of the following was discouraged by the National Forest Policy 1988? Okay? Forest-based industries without raw material availability. The National Forest Policy 1988 emphasized creating a massive people's movement for forest conservation. Okay? Biological Diversity Act 2002. The Biological Diversity Act 2002. Okay? 2002. The Biological Diversity Act was enacted to fulfill the obligation of the Convention on Biological Diversity. The main objective of Biological Diversity Act 2002 is conservation of biodiversity and equitable benefit sharing. Which statute was established under the Biological Diversity Act 2000. The headquarters of NBA is Chennai. Which of the following is a major feature of the Biological Diversity Act? Equitable sharing. State Biodiversity Act are constituted under Biological Diversity Act 2002, which is registered document local biological People's Biodiversity Register. Under the Biological Diversity Act, transfer of reach of results of foreign entities. Biological diversity to emphasize the most sustainable use of biodiversity. Okay? The compensatory was enacted in 2006. The Compensatory Afforestation Fund Act is commonly known as CAMPA. Full from Nahadi. The main objective utilization of fund for afforestation and forest conservation. Money answer 90%. Money answer 10%. Money answer forest land is diverted for non-forest purpose. Money answer Forest Conservation Act 1980. Money answer ecological value of diverted for land diverted. All of the above. Supreme Court of India. So, tinin bias na or wo around 70 to 60 to 70 questions on kahamre pori na screenshot na so mono